What's happening, people? I'm DJ Grace, and in today's live stream we're talking about mixing and mastering and how to mix and master a liquid drum and bass tune. Now, just to be clear, when I talk about mixing, I'm talking about mixing a production that you've not made, not talking about DJing. However, at some point, if anyone's interested, I can start doing tutorials about how to DJ as well. So big up Aaron, shout out everyone who's watching, everyone who's getting involved in the chat. Let me know if you can see me and hear me fine. And we're just going to start off listening to this tune for a bit while everybody joins. Yes. Big up the crew. Is it Suklal Music? I'm not sure if I'm saying it right. Big up DJ Fully Loaded. Shout out Tara Bass. Nice to see you here again. And big up everyone who's watching this back. If you're just watching it on YouTube later, thanks for checking it out. So it's not actually this tune that we're going to be mixing and mastering today. I've got another one. And we'll just give it another minute or two and then I'll open the project. In the meantime, let me know where you're tuning in from, what part of the world you're in. It's always interesting to know where people are locked in from, you know. I'm in Barcelona, Spain, but needless to say, I'm originally from the north of England. Big up the Canada crew. Nice one, Aaron. Tara Bass in the Netherlands. Wow, so it's all international. Everyone's in different countries. So Suklal Music is in the USA. And in case you're wondering, in case anyone's interested, you know the stats of where my main viewers are from. It's the UK first of all, and then the second country is the USA. So mainly English-speaking countries. But I have noticed that people are even using like automatic translation these days and watching it with like Russian. I don't know if it's like Russian audio or if it's just subtitles. But big up the Russian crew and shout out to everybody who's locked in. So this is a tune that I made. If you want to see more about the production of this tune, this one was called, well, the video was originally called How to Make an Orchestral Drum and Bass Tune. And I want to big up Manilyn Sahagun as well, multitasking. And she's in Barcelona. Alright, without further ado, I'm going to stop that and we're going to load up today's lesson. So the tune's called Muy Suave, which means very smooth in Spanish. So a little bit, because this is a beginner's lesson, so I want to just give a very quick overview of what you can see here. So as you can see, we've got drums, bass, instrumentals and vocal. What these are is groups, and in each of these groups is a load of tracks. We've got kicks, snares, breaks, crashes, hi-hats and all the rest of it. And you'll notice that all of the faders are set to 0 on these groups. But if I open up the group, you'll notice that the faders are all set down to the minimum. And I'm going to explain why in just a moment. So we've got the drums group. Inside the bass group, we've got 4 channels. One's called 808. We've got sub wobble, mid wobble and respace. Then inside instruments, we've got loads of different instruments, including Rhodes, pad, filtered pad, intro bell, and all sorts of different instruments. And then there is one more group called vocal, and it literally just has one vocal sample in it. So they're all the channels that we've got, and there's a total of 23, including groups. Over here we've also got return tracks A and B, which is reverb, and delay. And later on in this live stream, I'm going to explain how to use those as well. So when it comes to mixing a tune, you're going to want to have what's called an anchor point. Now, the anchor point is something that's not going to change at all, no matter what you do with the rest of the levels. And in this case, it's going to be the kick. So what I've done is I've set all the faders to down at the bottom, which is like the minimum. And one by one, we're going to bring up these faders and bring them in. So the anchor point is the kick. The reason why you need one thing that's not going to move, it's not going to go up or down once you've set it, is because you might end up chasing your tail. And what I mean by that is you might end up turning this up, turning that up, turning that up, you know, and then it turns out that now in relation, you might think that one thing is now a bit too quiet, and then you start turning things down again and you end up going round in circles. So in order to have to stop chasing your tail, you need this anchor point, which is something that's just going to be set in stone, and once you've set the level of that, you're not going to move it. So what you do is basically here we're going to go to the main section of the tune, like the drop, which I think is at bar 33. If we look at what I've got here, and by the way, these are actually multi-track recordings, as in I've exported all of the different parts of the tune as separate tracks. So you can see the kicks there, the snares there, they're all audio tracks, stereo audio tracks, right? So this is a practice that they used to do back in the days of people having not very good computers with limited processing power. And it's something that I still do sometimes, although it's not as necessary these days, because really and truthfully, you could just make your mix from the finished project with all of your MIDI instruments and all of your different this and that, you know. Your computer could probably handle it. But one thing that's good about exporting everything to these different audio tracks and doing it this way is it means you've committed. So you no longer have any control over editing the arrangement or, you know, making certain changes. So once you've committed, you're like, right, the tune's basically finished, it just needs mixing, right? So you export all these different things. People call them stems. There is a slight difference between a multi-track and stems, and the difference is with a multi-track project you've got absolutely everything still on separate channels. When it comes to stems, you might sort of group certain things together. Like, for example, you might group your rides and your hi-hats and your crashes all together and just call it cymbals or something like that, you know. But here we've got absolutely everything still on separate channels, and they're all exported as audio, and you can open each one up and see what's going on in them. So without further ado, let's get started. And I'm going to start off with the drums group, and we're going to start off with the kick as the anchor point. So let me play the project from the drop, and we're just going to fade this up. In fact, I'm just going to put this fader to 0, and you can see that it's hitting up to -12. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about the level that you want your final mix to be at. Now this is another thing that's kind of based in the past, but people say that you should try to get your master hitting up to roughly -6 or something around there. The idea is that when you give your tune to a mastering engineer, if you're going to do that, it's a good idea to leave 6 dB of headroom, so that if they need to do any processing, they'll have the headroom to do it. Because if you absolutely slam your tune into 0 or above and then hand it to the mastering engineer, well, there's no way they can undo that. So for that reason, it might be better to try and give it to the mastering engineer, or even if you are the mastering engineer and you're going to do it yourself, it's a good idea to try to get your mix hitting up to -6. So you might find that when you're doing your drums mix, it's good to get it up to maybe -10, and then when you add the bass and the instruments on top of that, it'll go a little bit further and it'll take it up to about -6. Now, these numbers aren't set in stone. These numbers are a rough guideline, so don't don't start thinking, oh, I need to get my drums hitting to -10. You know, it's a ballpark figure. So anyway, we've got the kick and it's hitting up to -12. And next thing I'm going to do is bring up the snare, and using my ears more than anything, I'm going to try and match the kick and the snare. You might find that visually they're looking about the same, or you might find that maybe it's better to put the snare slightly higher or slightly lower visually, but the main thing is that you're using your ears and you're trying to match them. So big up E.E. Wilson, thanks for coming back. And you know, I was saying last time that I'm going to try and go live every Sunday, but I do actually teach a audio production class, a private class, every other Sunday night, so it does make it a little bit difficult. So for that reason, we're doing this one on a Monday. But thank you for everyone for coming back, and sorry it was a bit short notice. So what we've got now is the kick and the snare, and I'm just listening out and trying to put them roughly at the right level. So the idea is that this is like the first pass, as in we're just going to do the faders first. We're not going to concentrate on EQing anything or compressing anything or messing about with these groups until we've done the faders for the first group. So the next one is called Scorpio Break. So let's have a listen. What you want to do is just gradually bring up that fader and listen out to see where you think it sounds like it's going to be good. In this case, maybe it's going to be above 0, and you know, I'm pushing it up to 1.8. And then you can just have a look at your track, so you can see with the next one, it's actually just a little fill at the end. So you can see there it is. So I'll bring that up and let's have a listen. Scorpio Break fill. Maybe a little bit further up. Alright, so let's bring up the next one, which is called Think Break. That one, to be honest with you, when I exported it, it seems like I exported it at the right level, because to me, putting it to 0 sounds good. Next, we've got hats. So let's have a listen to hats on their own just to hear what they sound like. So it's very subtle hats, you know, and they are very high passed, so it is literally just the top end. But they are adding something. I don't want to put them very loud though. So to me they sound good about there. And then the crash. So something like that, right? So I've got a couple of questions. So Human Program is saying, cheers from Arizona. I'm working on a short liquid / Atmo DNB set on Digitact 2, planning to fine tune the mix in DAW. Great timing here for some tips. So thanks for joining, man, and I hope you learned something from this. Obviously, we're just getting started. But yeah, this is how you make a mix. So far we've just got these drums going, and if you look at the master, we've got them so that they're hitting up to -13. And we've got another question. Are the samples processed beforehand? So I guess what you mean is, have I done EQing, have I done reverb, have I done compression, etc., etc.? The idea is that before you export these stems, you turn off a lot of that stuff, you know. So if you are the type of person who sort of produces as you go, and adds this sort of stuff as you go, you might want to turn it off again before doing your mix down and then do it in here instead. So this is a different project that I've opened, and I've imported the multi-tracks. I keep trying to call them stems. They're not really stems, they are the multi-track recording. I was saying before, there is a difference between multi-track and stems, and the difference is that multi-track just means you've got all of them, like all the different channels. None of them have been blended together. Alright, maybe Scorpio, this little Scorpio thing coming in, that might be a little bit loud. Just have a listen, see how you think it's sounding. Now there's different schools of thought of what to do next. Some people would say, do your processing on your drums group before you move on to everything else. Some people might say, well, let's go through all of the faders first and then start to do everything else. I think I'm going to go for school of thought 1. So basically I just want to do a little bit of fattening up on the drums before we move on to all the other groups. So one thing I'm going to do first of all is get the glue compressor and put that onto the drums group. Now I'm going to use a kind of, hang on, let me just go to view and info, and that's going to allow this little square for my webcam so that you'll be able to see all the different devices that I'm adding. So glue compressor, usually when it comes to doing drums like this, I like to put it on a kind of a slower attack and a faster release. Maybe I'll leave the ratio at 4:1, and then I'm just going to gradually bring down this threshold. Alright, now I've noticed that I was wrong about the Scorpio little fill there. I'm going to turn that back up a little bit. Also these hats. Get everything sounding how you like it. Now with the glue compressor, you'll notice how I've only really brought the threshold down until it's just tickling the needle. It's not really adding, or it's not really taking away that much in terms of gain. But because we have reduced the gain by around 1 dB, you might want to just add that dB back in with the makeup gain. And always monitoring the master to see where we're hitting up to, and -11's fine. You know, there's many ways to skin a cat, and some people like to produce much louder than this, but I've always been someone who tries to make it so that when the mix is finished, it hits up to around -6 dB. I learned all this from a guy called Mac, and he is a mastering engineer and a drum and bass producer and a live drum and bass drummer. But he was always in Dubstep Forum back in the day, in the late 2000s. He was always there giving tips, generally getting involved in the production forum. And he was the one who was always like, people were asking questions regarding mixing and mastering, and he was always there to answer them. So I learned a lot of these techniques from him. So I've spoken before about the drum bus, so let's add that. And usually when you add the drum bus, you want to turn down this trim a little bit. The reason why is because by default it's on 20% drive, so that's pushing the level up a bit. So you're going to want to compensate for that by turning down this trim a little bit. So let's just play it and make sure it's still hitting up to roughly the same level, which was 11. So I'm just adding a bit of that drive, which essentially is like a really soft saturation. But just making sure that it's really still, the drums are still hitting up to exactly the same level that we're hitting before, which is around -11. So that's good. What else do we need for the drums? I would say I've spoken before about this tape saturation from Air Windows, and it's called To Tape 8. So with that one, I'm just going to add that This is a very basic plugin. It doesn't even really have a UI, which is fine because, you know, all the rest of them are Ableton Live stock effects which don't have a UI either. So just going to bring down the output and bring up the input so that I'm pushing it in to the tape saturation. And then again, just making sure that I'm adjusting that output so that I'm making it hit up to roughly the same again, which was -11. There's a couple of things which I always turn off here. One of them's flutter, one of them's head bump. Alright, so I'll get rid of those two. Now what I'm going to do is, all of the processing that we've added so far to the drums group, I'm just going to select one, hold down shift and select the last one, and then Command and G to group it together. And now, in the top left of this effects group, we have this on and off button, right? So now we can listen to the drums with and without the processing. And this is why I've been reiterating that we need to keep on making sure that it's hitting up to the same peak that it was before, which was -11. Because now we can listen to it without. Well, it was -12. So what I'll do is I'll put it to -12 so it really is matched. And then you get an apples to apples comparison of what you're really doing to your drums. The idea is to basically fatten them up, control the dynamics, add some saturation, but make them peak to where they were before. That's without. And then adding it in. So you should notice that they are slightly more controlled and perhaps sounding a little bit fatter, but still peaking exactly where they were before. So that's all the processing I'm going to do on the drums so far. And the next thing we're going to do is go back to bringing up the faders for the second group. So the second group, we've got 4 tracks. 2 of them are sub bass. We've got 808 and sub wobble. 2 of them are mid bass. That's mid wobble and respace. So let's bring up the 808 first of all. Now these headphones that I'm wearing don't really have a great bass response. So it might be that I end up giving this track a little bit too much sub bass. That's one thing you've got to be careful of, and you've got to take into consideration, you know. If you know your headphones and you know that they have a bit of a weak bass, then you might end up compensating a little bit, and you might need to crank it. And vice versa, if you're using some Beats by Dre, which I wouldn't really recommend, and they've got some like over the top sub bass, well, you might want to try to compensate by lowering your sub a little bit. Eventually you're going to listen to this in your car, on your hi-fi, on the way to work, wherever, and you're probably going to notice, you know, comparing it to other tracks, and then you might have to come back and readjust. So the next track is called Sub Wobble. Again, not a hard and fast rule or anything like that, but I usually try to make it so that the bass group is going to be just a couple of dB lower than the drums group. Why? Because the drums have these transients that poke out and stick up, and you want them to sort of momentarily stick up louder than other things. So for that reason, you never want your bass to be louder than your drums group. Right, mid wobble. I know that this is a little bit of a difficult one because, to be honest with you, this mid wobble, after making it, now I'm kind of... By the way, full disclosure, this tune is like a year old. So I made it a year ago, and I might not necessarily like the sound of this mid wobble anymore, but I might be able to fix it with some EQing. So what I'm going to do with the mid wobble is, well, I'll leave it for now, but I'm going to EQ it in a bit. All right, next one, respace. Let me just put this back to the drop. Now, I'm going to talk to you about sidechain compression, and I think it's pretty important, and I'm just going to do it now. Now, there's different orders that you can do things in. For example, you might want to wait till right at the very end before you do your sidechaining, but I'm going to do it now. So what sidechain compression is a technique to duck the bass every time the kick hits momentarily, and that will allow the kick to come through and not interfere, so that the sub bass and the kick don't interfere with each other. So for that, we're going to need the compressor. I'm going to put that onto the bass group, and then here there's a little arrow that you can click and open it up, and there's a sidechain button, and then you'll need to choose where the audio comes from. So if we look on this little graph here, and let's just solo the bass and watch the graph. Wait, let me turn off sidechaining. Watch the graph. So this is what the bass looks like on the little diagram. So when you turn on the sidechaining and then choose an input, it's going to show you that input rather than the bass. So watch it now. It's actually showing us the kick. So all you need to do now is bring the threshold down so that it's a little bit below the peaks of the kicks. That's going to be the amount that it ducks the bass down by. And you see this little number here that says 0.00 dB. That's going to be the amount that it ducks it down by. So watch this now. So you'll notice that I've chosen 2.5 or 2.6, 2.9, so roughly 3 dB of gain reduction. So every time the kick hits, the bass just momentarily drops down by 3 dB. Now, as I was saying, there's different orders you can do things, but I really quite dislike the sound of that mid wobble. So for that reason, I'm just going to make the executive decision of choosing a high shelf and then just cranking down the top end, something like that. Much better. So as well as the sidechain compressor, which is controlling, ducking down the bass momentarily to allow for the kick to come through, I'm also going to add a glue compressor, and I will put that before the sidechain compressor, and I'm just going to bring down the threshold until we're reducing the gain a little bit. So you can see the needle moving. Obviously that's 5 dB there, and we're reaching up to probably 1 dB. So it's, again, very subtle. Maybe I'll do a little bit more, so it's like 1.5 dB. You can also, we are going to, so technically we're still on the first pass now, which means we are still in the stage of just doing the faders. The second pass is when you go through and do all your individual compression and EQing. So if there are any tracks within the drums or within the bass that happen to have too much dynamics, don't worry about that, because we're going to deal with them in a bit. So we've done the drums and bass now. I think they're sounding kind of balanced. What do you guys think? And does anyone have any questions at this point? Yeah, so Tara Bass is saying, listening on Bayer Dynamic DT990 headphones. I don't know that specific model, but I'm guessing it's the ones that are round and they've got the sort of grey pads and you see everyone wearing them. They are definitely some pro headphones, good for mixing on, so that sounds good. And then he's saying, my Yamaha TV soundbar is the best reference for correct mono stereo field. Yeah, so really what it comes down to is speakers that you know really well. And obviously we do spend quite a lot of time watching TV with the soundbar, so the more you know the speakers, the more they're going to tell you when you're comparing this track to other tracks. So next group we've got is instruments, and obviously what you're going to need to do is probably it would be good to do these faders in the order where things come in. So for example, our first track here has got nothing at the drop, so forget about that one for now. Actually no, we'll do it like that. I'll just put it to there so I know that we're actually going to be able to hear it, and bring it in. Now I'm starting to notice that the Reese is a bit quiet. Alright, so I've done the first Rhodes. Now there's another Rhodes here, so let's have a look at that one. So that plays at the exact same time. So we need to factor this in. You know, if these two Rhodes are going to be playing at the same time as each other, then obviously they kind of need to be treated as one instrument. So they sound like this. Here's the first one. Here's the second one. So that's sort of a higher end Rhodes. Top end. And I'm going to go through panning with you later. So far everything's panned in the center, but obviously when you've got two instruments that are very similar and they're playing exactly the same thing, you might want to consider panning one left and one right. So here's another Rhodes. I think this one's just playing a little bit of a melody. I don't know why the notes are so short. Maybe that originally had a load of reverb on it that made them longer, and I kind of need to add that back in later. Anyway, here's another one. This is called Pad. So that pad only happens when there's no drums and bass. This is the breakdown, you know. And then what we've got is filtered pad, and this is the one that happens during the rest of the tune when there is drums and bass. This one was designed to be very subtle and be in the background. Obviously, this is the drop, and this is where we've got the drums and bass happening, which are the main focus. I like to call it the spotlight, you know, so you can imagine actors on a stage, and there's someone who's operating a spotlight and shining it on different characters, depending on who's speaking and who's trying to be highlighted for the audience to pay attention to, right? So when it comes to doing your arrangement and your mix down, you need to shine the spotlight on different things. And needless to say, on the drop of a drum and bass tune, the spotlight is mainly on the drums and bass. So even if you're going to add another instrument in there, like this filtered pad, it's in the background and it's not getting the spotlight shone on it. So we're almost there really with the faders. Intro bell. So let's put it to here. This is the intro. I'm going to fade that up. Yeah, I would say the Beyerdynamic DT range, from what I've seen, they look like closed back headphones. Now the ones that I'm wearing now are the Sennheiser HD600, and these are open back headphones. And for that reason, I mainly use them for doing these live streams and doing YouTube videos. And the reason is because I can hear myself speaking. I don't know about you, but when I'm wearing closed back headphones and my ears are all blocked up like that, I just can't hear my own voice that well, and it feels weird talking. So I love a bit of open back headphones for doing YouTube and that. And I stand corrected because Tarabase is saying the 990 is an open back headphone. So it's good to have both if you can afford it. I'm using these Audio Technica ATH M50X headphones as my closed back headphones. I use them for DJing. I use them for testing my mix as well, you know. They have much better bass response than these, so later on, after I've done the mix down, I will wear them and have a listen what's going on in the low end. And I've also got this new subwoofer, which is absolutely amazing. And if you're not already subscribed to my channel, make sure you subscribe, because I'm going to be doing a review of this subwoofer, which is from Kali Audio, and I have the matching Kali Audio studio monitors. So I've got this like 2.1 setup, and it's full range, you know. I can hear everything from the highs to the mids to the lows and the super lows. So it's totally different from what I was mixing on before, which was just a little pair of Yamaha monitors which essentially had no bass. And as part of the review, I went back to just listening to the Yamahas on their own, and they suck, man. I mean, they're good as a reference. If you want to hear what your tune will sound like coming out of somebody's clock radio, then listen to it on the Yamaha 5-inch monitors. But like, as your main monitors for actually making drum and bass, I would definitely not recommend using them, because they sound tinny. There's way too much emphasis on the upper mids and the highs, and they have zero sub bass. Anyway, there's another track called Bell, and this is the one that's... So I've got an intro bell and a main bell, and needless to say, one of them's for playing during the intro, the other one plays during the main section. Let me gradually fade that up. Alright, and then there's literally one track left, and it is a vocal sample, and it sounds like this.
Sup with this lounge music right here.
One more time.
Sup with this lounge music right here. Sup with this lounge music right here.
You know, I have so many different pairs of headphones. People must think I'm crazy because I have like 2 different pairs of AirPods. I have the Pro ones with the noise cancellation, which are great for like public transport, like buses and the metro. I have the normal AirPods, which are a bit more like open back, so you can use them for phone calls and you can hear your own voice. I have these ones open back for doing YouTube. I have the closed back ones for doing DJing and checking my bass and stuff. And then I have one more pair, which is the Bose QC35, which I use pretty much exclusively on planes for flying and stuff. So that's 5 different pairs of headphones that I regularly use. Let me know if you guys are like me and you use far too many pairs of headphones. So I think we're pretty much there with the faders now. So let's just play it from the beginning and have a listen. Intro bell maybe a bit quiet. Tara Bass, I've missed your question, sorry man. The question was, why am I not using the glue compressor with 0 attack for sidechaining? Great question. Honestly, I think maybe when the glue compressor first came out, it didn't even have sidechaining, and this one did. So that was the one I learned on, and that's the one I've stayed with. Like, I think they maybe added this a bit later, and I've literally never used it. But it's a great question, and thanks for bringing my attention to that. As you can see, the attack that I'm actually using on my sidechain compressor is 0.2 milliseconds, which is, you could say, pretty much nothing. I mean, it's a fifth of 1 millisecond, you know what I mean? Sometimes you just learn on a specific tool and then you carry on using it, but like, I do appreciate you letting me know that the glue compressor also has sidechain, and I feel a little bit embarrassed that I didn't even know that. Sometimes you just don't notice that little arrow button, you know. And I was saying to someone the other day about the wavetable synth and how you can click that little arrow and it expands it so it's full screen, you know. Many people didn't know that either. Right, so we've done all the faders. We've done some processing on the drums and the bass. So the instruments group as a whole could have a little bit of glue compressing on it. One thing I really dislike is this. There's like one Rhodes melody, this thing. I don't know if that originally had a load of delay and reverb on it and stuff, but without it, it just sounds weird. So I'll come back to that in a second, but for now, let's do a little bit of processing on stuff. So there was one thing that I like to do usually when I'm working with Ableton Live's stock plugins and stuff is just like drag stuff from one thing to another and then hold down Alt so you're copying it. For example, this to tape 8, which is tape saturation, it might sound good on the instruments group. So all you do is drag it over and you can see that there's a tiny little square symbol with a plus, which means if I let go of Alt, you'll see that the little plus symbol disappears. I don't know if you can see that because it's so tiny. But when that little plus appears, it means that you're copying rather than moving. So hold down Alt, let go. Now the to tape 8 is on the instruments group. And essentially what we're doing now is adding some tape saturation to the entire instruments group. And it's almost as if this track was on tape. And by the way, when they say tape, what they mean is like multi-track studio tape, not like a cassette. Although I have often thought about what it would be like, you know, sometimes if you want to experiment, you could record things to a cassette and then back to digital. One thing I will say about cassettes is, though, they do have a high noise floor, and we might look at the past with rose-tinted glasses and think, oh, the analog days were so amazing, everything was so warm and rich, but actually, cassettes were terrible quality. They had, like, low fidelity high end and they had a load of hiss. Who wants that? Let me put an EQ8 onto the whole bass group and just have a look what's going on. So again, we'll click that arrow to kind of full screen it, and then you can see the whole frequency spectrum up here. And you can see the fundamental frequencies are these ones that are appearing in the sub-bass region. And then what appears in the mid-range is all fundamentals. Sorry, all the harmonics, right? The question is, do we want our harmonics to continue past 1K and up into the upper mids, or do we want them to just be concentrated down here? What we can do is experiment with maybe turning these harmonics down a bit up here. Very subtly though, you know. It's just that the sort of mid-wobble bass is kind of annoying me a bit. I like the bell. Alright, so guys, listen, I'm going to press save there. And now it's time to move on to the next pass. Now I call it a pass. Basically, doing the faders was one pass, and obviously we took a little couple of side detours to add some compression and some side chaining and some tape saturation and stuff. But essentially we've just done pass 1. Now we're going to go back to the beginning, all the way back to track 1, which is the kick, and we're going to do EQing and compression. So with that being said, let's go to the drop and have a listen to our kick. And let's put an EQ8 on it. And again, I'll press that arrow so that we can see in a bit more detail. Now, it's pretty good because it's rolling off nicely. And I can't remember if I EQ'd this in the original project, but you can see that down here in the absolute super low end, there's nothing. And that's good, you know? But one thing I sometimes like to do is try and give it a dip in the lower mids, in the sort of mud area. Take out some mud. You might want to narrow in on the Q. And then depending on your kick, what type of kick it is, you might want to do something like this and add some high end in it, maybe just subtly. And whenever you're doing this kind of EQing, I mean, I shouldn't be doing it in solo for a start. I should be doing it with the whole track. whenever you're doing this kind of EQing, what you want to do is press this little on-off button of the EQ unit, just to double check that what you're doing is actually productive and making it sound better and not worse. And now I'm going to draw for the compressor and do a little bit of gain reduction on the kick. When I say a little bit, notice that I'm talking about 1 decibel, okay? So I've already mixed the drums so that I'm happy with the level of everything. But in order to add a little tiny bit of fatness, what you can do is 1 dB of gain reduction and then 1 dB of compensating it back in with this little output gain control. Alright, so that's just a bit of EQ and compression on the kick, very subtle stuff. Now it's time to move on to the snare. So again, drag the EQ on. For the purposes of this tutorial, I'm putting it as in big screen mode so we can really try and have a look what's going on. And in this one, do you remember our kick had nothing going on below like 60 Hertz? Look at what's going on with this snare. Now, needless to say, well, obviously this is kind of a beginner's guide, so I should say it. Your fundamental frequency of your snare is like up here. It's like this one. So 250 in this case. So we don't really want anything anywhere near that in terms of sub bass. So if I add a high pass filter at say just under 200, theoretically that shouldn't be taking away anything useful or musical out of the snare. It's literally just removing the mud. Now you can do this sweeping technique if you want. So have you ever, maybe you've seen this, maybe you haven't. If you just boost it right up with a bell curve and do this, and you might find that certain frequencies are super harsh. You know, in this case, to be honest with you, maybe that. So you could try it, but it's not necessary. I'm just sort of showing you that if you do find any frequencies in there that you decide sound unpleasant, what you do is you sort of narrow in on them like this. Like that. Don't know if you can hear that one. That's like ringing a lot there. So what you can do is then, once you've found it, you just crank this gain control down like that. Put the Q super narrow. Let's have a listen to the snare now with and without it. You might not notice much difference, you know, but sometimes when you've got a snare, especially if you've ever recorded live drums in a room, you might find that these horrible frequencies that need cutting out, and that's the way you do it. Anyway, let's move on to the Scorpio break. Oh yeah, and by the way, I didn't do any compression on the snare, so perhaps we should just give it like a quick, like before, a bit of 1 dB of gain reduction and then boost it by 1 dB, like this. So you see the orange number, it's reducing it by 1 dB. There's no by the way, there's no rule like you have to give it 1 dB. You do all this by ear. But it should be kind of subtle. And you might find that actually, once you've done your little bit of gain reduction, you might not even want to boost it back up. Alright, Scorpio break. I'm interested to know if there's any sub bass in this, because I shouldn't be. Yeah, so you see all that. So just a little bit of info about what should have that low end in it. Essentially, in this tune I've got 2 tracks of sub bass. One of them's an 808, one of them's like a sub wobble. They should have sub bass in them. And your kick should have something below 100 Hz. But for the most part, most of the tracks in this project shouldn't have anything below 100 Hz. So watch what happens when I play this Scorpio break. We've got stuff going on down here. Now it's not very loud, but it's still there, and it probably should be eradicated. So let's just put this to a high pass filter like that, and you can see it's gone. And you probably noticed no difference in terms of the sound. So it sounds the same. It's still got all the useful frequencies in it, but we've got rid of the useless ones that were just eating up room. Alright, and like I say, I shouldn't be doing this in solo. You should almost all the time you should be listening to either your whole track or just your drum bus, but not just one individual element at a time. And let's try the Scorpio break with more high pass. You'll find the sweet spot, you know. And Tara Bass said before, I wish I had your ears. And this is something that I wish I had other people's ears. And it's like, the more you do this, the more your ears get better at hearing certain frequencies. And there is this app, I've forgotten the name of it now, but there's this ear training app where it plays like a tone. And then you've got 4 options. Which one, what do you think this is? 100 Hertz, 300 Hertz, 1K or 4K, and you tap what you think it is, and then it tells you the right answer. And the more you play it, the more you start getting it right. And that's an ear training app, so you can hear different frequencies. And it's a bit of fun, but it's also very useful. So that's the Scorpio break, the main Scorpio break, but we've also got this other little Scorpio break fill, which just goes like this. Wait. Goes like this. So let's just, again, put the EQ8 on. And it looks like in the original project, it looks like I did EQ this because it doesn't appear to have any low end in it. So pretty much don't need the EQ on this one as far as I'm concerned. Maybe a little bit of compression. At the end of the day, why put an EQ8 on there if it's not needed, you know? No point just putting it on there for the sake of it. Now you might notice that I am actually compressing this one more, and it's because if you look in the little graph of the compressor, you'll see that it's just like some super spiky transients. And also, if you look at the actual track there, you'll see that the first hit is louder than the others. And if you give it a few dB of gain reduction, and it essentially is leveling it out so the hits are more uniform. And then because I've reduced the gain of it by quite a bit. And you notice on the fader here I've put it to minus 3.4, so you might find that putting it up a little bit more. Let's have a listen from the beginning of the drop. Where were we? Bar 33. Alright, so I've put an EQ8 on the think brake, and this is what the think brake sounds like, by the way. So you can hear that I'm literally just using a little shuffle of it. There's no kicks, there's no snares, just the shuffle. So with that being said, let's have a look at the EQ8, and you can see there is stuff below 100 Hertz, and the actual useful part that we're trying to use is roughly in here in the upper mids around 1K, and a bit below that and a bit above it. So what I'm going to do now is choose the high pass filter and bring this up and take it off solo. That's fine like that. Not trying to go too extreme, but obviously just making sure there's no sub bass at all in the think brake. This is very subtle, and to be honest with you, it's not looking like there's a ton of dynamics in it anyway, so So when I say dynamics for the beginners, what do I mean? It's there's a difference between the loud parts and the quiet parts. So think about it like this. If there's some drums and you've got the kick and snare are hitting up to a certain point quite loud, and then you've got all this like it's like lower stuff, which is the shuffle and the hi-hats and stuff, that's really quiet in between the kick and snares, then you could say there's a lot of dynamics. And if you were if you managed to bring the kick and snare down and bring up those shuffle parts and hi-hats and stuff so that it's a bit more uniform, you could say now there are less dynamics in the drums. So that's what I mean. And when you look at that think brake, you can see on the little graph of the compressor, it's like there's like 4 hits, right? It goes there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Those little 4 hits, none of them are louder than the others. They're all the exact same level as each other. So you could say there aren't much dynamics in the think brake. Let's go to the hats. So as you can see, in the original project that I did, it's very likely that I already EQ'd the hats. And you can see that because there's no bass, there's not even any mid-range. In fact, the first frequencies you can see are like 10K. So I've clearly already EQ'd the hats, and for that reason, I'm just going to delete the EQ again. There's no point in doing it twice. As for the dynamics, let me just drag this track so that it's taller, and then you can really get a sense of the dynamics. And as you can see, every single hat hit, it's a bit of a tongue twister, but every single hi-hat hit is the exact same volume as each other. So that tells you I've already worked on the dynamics. That could have been with saturation, that could have been with compression. I can't remember, it was a year ago, but what I can tell you is we don't need to work on the dynamics of these hats because it's already sorted. As for the crash, It's all right. Let's have a listen. Let's have a look on the EQ8 and see if there happens to be any sub bass in this crash or any mids. So you can see that the lowest frequencies are around 400. We might want to take it further than that. Yes, Jason Story. I locked into the Twitch stream yesterday. You and your mate were absolutely smashing it, and you are so good at mixing vinyl. And I hope you guys are going to carry on that stream because it's so fun to watch and great sound quality. Jason Story, you don't need to watch this stream because you've already seen this entire process. So, just for the people who've only just joined us, what we've done so far is we've done the first pass where we went through and did all the faders, made sure everything's at roughly the right volume. Then we started to do pass 2, which is doing EQing and compression on each of the drums. And essentially we are getting towards the end of the drums now. I've just done EQing on the crash. Not sure if I'm going to really need any compression on the crash, but let's have a look. Probably not, maybe just a little bit. And then that's it. So the drums group is done for pass 2, and let's move on to the bass. Alright, so I'm just going to drag an EQ8 onto this 808 and see what's going on in the frequency spectrum. And you can see that this is literally just the fundamental frequency of the sub bass, as in it's got no harmonics, it's got no mid or high, it is literally just that. So in terms of EQing, we're not going to need any. So I'll delete that again. As for compression, let's put that on it. Oops, what are we doing here? Let's close this EQ. As for compression of the 808, you can see that some of the hits are slightly louder than others, so we might want to bring this down to about there and try and catch those peaks and make it a bit more uniform. And since I've done that, and now I'm shaving off 2 dB, we might want to opt for turning the 808 up by 2 dB. So you can either do it by turning up the fader here, or if you want to, you can use the compressor itself with the output gain here. So let's move on to the next track, which is Sub Wobble. Sounds like this. Again, when I made it, I made sure it was just the fundamental frequency of the sub bass, so there is no mid, there is no high. It's not really necessary to do any EQing in my opinion. Although there is a little, every time it comes in, there is a little click. So let's have a listen. I don't know if you can hear that. It's like click, click. So let's just try it with a low pass and see if that can control that click a little bit. And I think that sorted it out. So it was worth EQing it, even if it was just to remove the click. Needless to say, that click was quiet and it was, in the grand scheme of things, probably inaudible, but it's good to, if you can, control it. Why not, you know? So, compression on the sub wobble. Let's have a look. Certain wobbles are a little bit quieter than others, so if we bring down the threshold to about here, it'll catch those peaks and make them a bit more uniform. That's 1.7 dB of gain reduction, so it's 2 point something. So you can either opt for adding that back in here, you can opt for adding it in here with the fader, or using your ears, you might decide that actually it's sitting better in the mix now how it is. Let's move on to the next one. So mid wobble, you may remember during pass 1 I was getting a bit frustrated with mid wobble because it's got a bit too much kind of upper mids in it, so that's why I did that high shelf and took some of that out. But let's just open this up and have a look what's going on. Now with a mid wobble, because we've already sorted out we've already got layers for the sub bass, this shouldn't really have any super low end in it, and for that reason I'm going to try it like this. Not that extreme, but something like this. And you can even do this and put the curve to like the ×4 curve, so it's super steep, and that'll really make sure that this layer has no sub bass, because like I say, it's already being taken care of with the sub wobble. So let me just play sub wobble and mid wobble together just to make sure that it is sounding fat and that we're not losing it, we're not missing any of that low end. Let's toggle that number 2 on and off and see if it sounds better with or without. Going back. Yeah, so actually, with the benefit of hindsight, I think the bass sounded better without doing that, so let's leave it as it is. It was worth the little bit of trial and error just so we know for sure. Now compression. And like before I was saying about dynamics, now look at here on the compressor, look at the peak of each wobble. This is one that you would say the dynamics are already under control, because every time it's peaking they're all exactly the same level, to the point where it looks like in the original project I might have already done some compression and dynamic control because they're just like too uniform. And then the respace is this sort of womp sound, and it sounds like this. And to me this one doesn't really need any EQing. Let's have a look at the compression. It might benefit from like taking a little bit of that peak off and then boosting it back up again. Big up E.E. Wilson. Thank you for tuning in again, man. I really appreciate it when you guys tune in like several weeks in a row and keep up to date with these streams, you know. And obviously, part of me wanted to do the mix for the tune that we made last week. However, I wasn't really finished with the arrangement, and I thought I really want to get on to mixing and mastering, because I know you guys several people have said to me in the comments of some of my tutorials, like, can you make a tutorial about mixing and mastering? So I wanted to do that tonight. But don't worry, the beginner's guide to liquid drum and bass tune from last week, that track is, I'm pretty happy with it, and we are going to continue it. Maybe on Sunday we'll carry on with that. So drums and bass have been done in terms of EQ and compression, and I'm just going to press Command and S to save this, and I'm going to drink some of my tea because I'm starting to get a sore throat from waffling. If you haven't already, could you do us a favour and press the like button on this stream, because that's going to help it to be pushed out to more people, and then more people can learn how to mix and master their liquid drum and bass tunes. Also, make sure you're subscribed to this channel, because there's loads of tutorials on here, loads of tutorials coming in the future, and I'm also doing gear reviews. So I've done one on the Kali Audio IN8 studio monitors. I've got the matching subwoofer review coming out probably next week, and all sorts of different videos. And just to let you in on the schedule, I have this guitar from the 1970s. It was my second ever electric guitar when I was 17 years old, and I never knew at the time that it was so old school. It's made in Japan in like the early 70s, and basically it disappeared from my life for 18 years, and I thought it was gone forever, but it turns out it was tucked away in the corner of my mum's garage gathering dust. And recently I imported it into Spain where I'm living and gave it some TLC and set it up super nice and documented the whole thing. So if you're interested in guitars, there's also going to be that video coming out. I literally recorded it today. So yeah, there's all sorts of videos on my channel, some pretty interesting stuff, so make sure you're subscribed. Anyway, without further ado, the instruments group. It's time for us to go through the instruments one by one, doing some EQ and compression. So the Rhodes, let's have a listen. Yes, I've been reunited with my guitar. Such a cool guitar as well, man. Many of you don't know that I play instruments like guitar and bass, but there is one video so far on my channel where I played the bass. It's called How to Make a Jazzy Jungle Tune, and I played a real bass line on that one. So there's this Rhodes, and the fundamental frequencies are hitting around 100 and just above. And I was about to say that there's no sub bass, but I would be lying because certain notes do have sub bass. So what we're going to do is, I don't want to take out any of the actual musical information of this, so for that reason I'm going to roll it off at 95. Maybe 90. Compression. Alright, so look at this. When I talk about dynamics, right? Well, they are sort of peaking at the same level, so I suspect there might have already been some compression done in the main project. But I will just shave off the peaks a little bit, and when I say shave, I'm talking about taking off half a dB. So it's very subtle stuff. Now the next Rhodes. And I shouldn't be doing any of this in solo, so I need to set a good example and do everything with the whole mix playing. So basically the same as the other Rhodes. I'm trying to scoop out the extreme low end, but I'm not really trying to take out any lower mids because it's actually useful information. And what we've got here is, at the actual drop, the lower mids are provided by those wobbles. You know, these basses here, the mid bass and the wobble, right, which sound like this. So they're providing the sort of lower mids, right? And what I've done with the arrangement of this tune is that after 16 bars, those basses go away and you've just got sub bass, but guess what comes in? The Rhodes. And look at the frequency spectrum of the Rhodes. Yes, it's the lower mids, and that's not an accident, that was done on purpose. So these Rhodes basically replace the wobble in terms of taking up the lower mids in the frequency spectrum. Now, when I was a beginner producer, what I would do is I'd be like, oh, that's an instrument, you know, that's a mid-range instrument, and therefore I'm just going to roll off all of this, you know, and I'm going to have it right up there. And obviously that's a mistake, because you're going to end up with a huge hole in the middle of your frequency spectrum where there's just nothing going on in the lower mids, you know. And that's, people call it the mud region, and you do need to be very careful with it. But you can't just have nothing there. So I've been talking to you about this Rhodes 3, and I've been looking forward to doing something about it. So first of all, let's put on the EQ8. And look at this. There's a cheeky build-up right in the bottom of the frequency spectrum, and then the actual fundamental frequency is right up here at almost 500 hertz. So all of that can go. And I'm talking everything below 400 can go. Maybe 350. And I don't even like this instrument. It might even end up getting deleted. Alright, next. Compressor. It's already very uniform, so it doesn't need any compression. What I think it does need is either delay or reverb or both. And this is something I was saying at the beginning of this stream, that when you get to this point, you shouldn't really be needing to do any sort of creative effects. You should have probably done them already. But in this case, maybe it was by accident. I might have accidentally just deleted the delay off it or the reverb off it, or both. But let's have a listen how it sounds with a bit of delay on it. So what I'm trying to do here is just make it a bit more interesting, because it was literally just playing what the chords are playing with like super low sustain, and I wasn't happy with it anyway. So what should we do? Should it be a normal reverb or a hybrid reverb? Try hybrid. Alright, so I'll bring down the wet and dry. I'll choose a creative style of reverb, so it could be spring or plate. Let's try plate. So quite low, wet and dry. Definitely don't need 3.5 seconds of decay, so I'll bring that down to 1.5, and let's have a listen now. I've turned on the ping pong, so it's sort of pinging and ponging from left to right to give it a bit more stereo image. And in a bit we're going to start working on the panning of the track, so that'll be pass 3. So we've done pass 1, faders, getting the general levels right. Pass 2, EQ and compression. Pass 3, spoiler alert, we're going to be moving on to the panning of each element. Alright, so that was called Rhodes 3. Next we've got pad. this is the intro. It really should have been called intro pad, and it sounds like this. Let's have a look using the EQ8 and see what's going on frequency-wise of this pad. So the good news is there's no sub bass in it whatsoever. And again, if you don't feel like you really need to do any EQing to it, then don't. It's not like you have to EQ every single element. It's not got any sub bass getting in the way. It's not got an excessive amount of high end. It's just right, really. So for that reason, I've just deleted the EQ again. And you can see that certain swells come up and are poking out a bit, and then it sort of goes down to a general level. So what I've done is I've brought down the threshold of the compressor to that general level to control the overall dynamics of the pad. We've got another pad here. This is called filtered pad. So we'll listen to this one. As the name suggests, this one's already been EQ'd, and I'm not even going to bother. We're just going straight to the compression. Again, the compression might not even be necessary either. This is one rare element where it essentially needs no processing. Maybe just some very, very subtle peak control. Intro bell. Let's have a look if there's any sub bass in it. So this is there's very little harmonics in this. It's just literally sine wave type things, just playing the fundamentals. To me, this is another one that doesn't really need any EQing. And let's have a look at the dynamics. As you can see, certain hits of the bell are poking up much louder than others. Tara bass, why am I taking out dynamics again? I guess you mean out of the filtered pad, and you would be right in saying that. In fact, I can just delete that compressor. This one, you can see there's dynamics, especially the first hit was peaking up way louder. Other hits are much quieter, so you can do something like that. So at its maximum, we're taking off about 2 dB. Then normal bell. Probably the same as before in terms of it being very sine wavy and having very little in terms of, what's it called? In terms of harmonics, but still worth a look. So put the EQ8 on. Yeah, so they're just, it's very, very concentrated in this one little area. There's nothing too high, there's nothing too low. So in that case, the EQ8 can go. Compressor. Very subtle compression. Well, not very, but Tara bass, it's a good question. So basically what it is, yeah, when it comes to drum and bass and electronic music in general, there's a bit of a loudness war going on. And what a loudness war is, you might want to watch a separate YouTube video about it, but what it is that everybody's trying to make their track as loud as possible. And if you don't participate in the loudness war, when you end up giving your tracks to a DJ and they mix your tune in with everybody else's, you're going to find that your tune is so much quieter that the DJ probably won't even play it, because he's like, that tune's too quiet. It doesn't really mix with everything else. Obviously, he could just turn up the gain control on the DJ mixer to compensate, but many DJs won't bother. They'll just be like, oh, that's a badly produced track, I'm not going to play it, you know? So, how do you get your tune loud? Well, one of the main ways is to kind of control dynamics and reduce dynamics and make sure there's no rogue peaks poking up. So for that reason, I probably should have explained this before, and thanks for your question. That's why you don't really want things popping out like that. Shout out E.E. Wilson. So no one can talk, they only have to worship the feeling. Well said. Anyway, what I've been doing in this tutorial so far, I mean, I'm not like doing any extreme squashing. As I kind of keep reiterating, I'm only controlling the dynamics by like, I never go above 5 dB of gain reduction. In fact, so far in this tutorial, I don't think I've really even gone above 3 dB. It's always 1, it's like half a dB, maybe 1, maybe 2, you know? So this is just gentle control, nothing too extreme. However, it does say in the title, mixing and mastering. So when it comes to squashing the hell out of the dynamics, watch this space. Anyway, let's have a look at this little vocal channel.
What's up with this lounge music right here?
I think this was De La Soul Live Lounge from the early 2000s. And what happened is, I used to live with this guy called Casper, who produces dark psytrance, right? And in the early days of me producing, I used to make dubstep. And he was into my dubstep productions. This guy Casper, he loved a bit of dubstep, right? But then when I started to make some really chilled out, like slow jungle beats, I made this one tune, and he walked past my bedroom and he just turned to me and he said, "So you're making lounge music now?" And we both laughed, and I've always remembered that quote. So when I heard De La Soul Live Lounge and I heard this sample and he says this,
What's up with this lounge music right here?
I thought to myself, that reminds me of Casper. I've got to sample it, I've got to use it in a tune, and I've got to show Casper. So here it is. Finally, I made the tune last year, 2024. I've still not shown Casper. He probably doesn't even remember saying it, because we're literally talking about like 2009 or something when he said that. So let's have a look on the EQ. See what's going on with the frequency.
What's up with this lounge music right here? What's up with this lounge music right here?
Yeah, so there is a little, I don't know if you saw it, but there was a little flutter of something in the sub bass there. Look here.
What's up with this lounge music
Just a
right
tiny
here?
little bit, but why not just roll it off if we can? It's not going to affect what he's saying. Like this.
What's up with this lounge music right here?
So the lowest sort of frequencies of his actual voice are around 100. So as long as we roll it off at just below 100, all we're doing is getting rid of rogue sub bass, but not affecting his actual vocal. So let's just drag a compressor onto here, and then we're basically done with pass 2.
What's up with this lounge music right here?
And I'm sorry if the music that you're hearing is actually quite quiet. Sometimes it's difficult for me to manage the voice versus music levels of this stream, you know? And I was saying at the beginning, when you've done your mix, you want it to be hitting up to -6. Look what the master's saying now. -6.6. So my little method here is tried and tested. You can get your mix to the exact right level to give to the mastering engineer, and they're going to be very happy with you, because you've left them 6 dB of headroom so they can do their whole process and make it sound as good as possible with EQs and all sorts of different stuff. So I'm going to stop that there and press save. Anyone got any questions so far? We've done all the faders, got everything to the right level. We've done EQing and compression on every single track. There is still these groups, so instrument group. Yeah, we did put some glue compressor and tape saturation on there. This vocal, really and truthfully, this vocal, I can put that in with the instruments like that. Why? Because the whole reason why I usually have a separate group for vocals is when I'm working with like singers and rappers and actual vocalists. It's not just for when I've got a little 2-second sample, because that can just be thrown in with everything else, to be honest. And that saves me having to do separate glue compression and saturation on that. It just gets thrown in with this.
What's up with this lounge music right here?
So if you haven't already, please make sure you press the like button on this stream and help me spread it to more people so that everybody else can learn to mix and master as well. And if you think anything in this track is sounding too loud or too quiet, let me know and I'll address it. As I was saying before, the headphones that I use for these live streams have a bit of a lack of sub bass, to be honest. So when it comes to working on the low end, I am kind of flying blind there. But I've got these other headphones which are much better for the bass. I'm also using some decent studio monitors with a decent low end, so I can always check the bass later when I've finished the stream. Right. As I was saying before, pass 3 is all about panning and stereo width. Now, as a general rule, I would say the lower the frequency is of an element, the less you want to stereoize it. And this comes from the days of cutting vinyls. You would never want your sub bass to be in stereo. It doesn't matter as much these days, but still, people generally tend not to put their kick in stereo, you know. So the general rule of thumb is to not put your kick in stereo, not put your sub bass in stereo. I want to show you a tool called an imager. Now the one I'm using here is actually part of Ozone. So if we go to AU, these Ozone tools, and one of them is called the imager. I'm just going to put that on. I'll put it on the hats just to give you an example. So the imager looks like this, right? And this little graph here has got left on one side, it's got right on one side. And if I just solo my hats and play them. Oops, one sec. Right. Look how when the hats are playing, they're basically central, right? So one thing you can do is you can pan them to the left or you can pan them to the right, or you can kind of add some spread, which it kind of uses phase in order to spread them out. So there's a little button down here called Stereoize. You can click that, right? Now you can do this as multi-band. so that you can add a different amount of spread for different frequency bands, and you can add less to the low end, more to the mids, and blah blah blah. Or you can just do it as one band. You can just use band 1 and that'll be the entire frequency spectrum. So watch what happens on our weird little graph over here when I turn up the width. You see how it's spreaded it out? So it's not, instead of just being like a line right in the middle, which would mean that you're only hearing it in total mono, it's spreaded it out a bit. So that's what an imager does. Now, as I was saying before, like the lower the frequencies, the less you want it to be in stereo. Now, as hats are right up there above 10K, then it's fine to spread them out quite a bit. And as I was saying before, sometimes if you might want to drag an effect from one track to another, so if we just grab the Ozone Imager and drag it from hats to crash and put it there and let go, now it's on there as well. So let me solo the crash channel and go into this imager. Here it is. Let's just wait a sec for the crash to come along, and look, it's spread out a lot. It's basically all over the stereo spread. We might want to try that with the Think Break. So go back to the Ozone that was on the Hats channel, drag it to the Think Break and hold down Alt and let go and put it on there. I don't know if you noticed, but what that's done is it's put these little think shuffles in stereo as well. So if I turn off Stereoize, watch the think. Wait. What's up with this lounge music right here? So look, it's a very, very thin line right in the center. Turn on Stereoize. If you're wearing headphones now, you will have heard it get wider. That just adds a bit more interest to the drums. Now, I don't really want to pan this Think Break to either the left or right, because I think it's going to cause a bit of an imbalance, you know. And call me a weirdo, but I just kind of want everything to be symmetrical. So if I pan something to the left, I want something to sort of counterbalance that on the right. And in this case, I'm just going to spread it a bit instead. It's up to you if you want to do that though. If you've got hats in your track and you want to pan them over to the right or the left a bit, experiment. You can even try it with the snare. So let's take this Ozone Imager, put that on the snare and see how that sounds. It could be terrible, it could be a terrible idea, but why not try? What's up with this lounge music right here? Alright, listen to the snare. Now this is over the top. This is too much. But you might want to just, you might want to just, so before it was on 30, you might want to just try it on like 10. Or even less, just to spread it a tiny bit. Let me turn that off. Turn it back on again. It's subtle now, you know, extremely subtle, to the point where you can barely even notice it. Alright, so that's a little bit about using the imager, but for the most part, when it comes to creating stereo within your mix, one thing you're going to want to do is use panning. So on the drop, we've got these two Rhodes instruments that are very similar, and they're playing almost the same thing, but one of them's got more high-end fizz. So let's just put it to there. So one thing you can do is decide that you might want to put one over to the left and one over to the right, and now listen to it. For the people who are wearing headphones, you'll notice that now that's just added a load of width to the track. as for the filtered pad, I'm going to show you another trick when it comes to trying to add stereo width to your tune. So let's go to audio effects and let's go to this one called auto pan. And I'm going to take that to the filtered pad, okay? Now, you've got the rate down here. You can either use the hertz or you can use this. Click the little note icon and then you'll be able to actually sync it to the project tempo, and you can put it on 1 bar or 2 bars, you know, and in that case it's going to take 2 bars for it to pan from left to right. And then you've got the amount knob, so obviously you're not going to want it to be on 100%, because then it's literally going to be only in your left ear, and then it's going to auto pan and it's going to be only in your right ear. We want it to be more subtle than that, so let's try a bit below 50%, maybe 30 actually, or let's try 36%. All right, now I'm going to solo it so you can hear what it's doing. All right, it's in the right ear, it's in the left ear. In fact, we might want it to be slower. Let's do 4 bars and let's do the amount down a bit. Alright, so it takes a while. It's in the right ear and then it's gradually going over. And then it's in your left ear. So this is something that's subliminal, you know. When you're listening to the track, you're not going to be thinking, oh, the pad's moving from left to right. It's something that happens subliminally, but it does create a stereo effect. So maybe intro bell could have the stereo spreader on it. Let's have a listen. So I'm going to go back to the hats channel and grab the stereo spreader that I already have, and then I'm going to bring it over here. Oops, what's going on? Right, forget that. Let's close this down because this is annoying. Right, let's try that one more time. So go to the hats channel, grab the imager, take it down to intro bell, and then I'm just going to hold down Alt before I let go so that little plus symbol shows up, meaning that we're copying it. So let's listen to the intro bell now. And you can see that it's jumping around all over the place, so it seems like the intro bell pretty much already had a stereo effect on it. Let's turn off stereo eyes. You see how it's moving around all over the place? So that just shows you that the intro bell and also the normal bell, the patch that I used for those already had stereo effects on them, so there's no need for it, you know. And that's it. That's all the panning I'm really going to do. I don't want to go mad and start panning things hard left and hard right. One thing I will say is that if I was working with a vocalist and I had the lead vocal and then I had a load of backing vocals, I would be using a lot more panning for the backing vocals, because I'd have like one copy of them that's standing over there to the left, one copy of them to the right, and you know, what you get is this. It's like there's a chorus of the same person. The lead vocal is right down the middle, and all the backing vocals are moved to the left and right. Anyway, that's a bit about stereo panning and stuff, and that's pretty much it for mixdown. So let's go on to mastering. Now, full disclaimer: this isn't a proper like master. This is what we're going to do here is I was saying before, if you give this to a DJ and they're going to play this track with everyone else's tracks and you're mixing it in, well, you're going to want it to roughly be the same volume as everybody else's tune. How do you know what volume it is compared to everyone else's? Well, there's this plugin called the Ulean Loudness Meter 2. And this is a free plugin, and it looks like this. Now, there's this measurement system called LUFS. Probably stands for something like loudness units full scale or something like that. Basically, it is a way to measure, because like the thing is, yeah, in the digital domain, everybody's tunes are hitting up to 0 dB because you can't really go any further than that, or you shouldn't be anyway. So the peak value is 0, but the loudness could be less or it could be more. And the way how we measure that is with LUFS. So we know that ours is peaking up to -6, and I know that this on this LUFS meter it's going to be quite low, but let's have a listen anyway. So short term 20, integrated 20. Now, as a rough guideline, when it comes to making drum and bass music, if you want it to sound as loud as everybody else's tune, you're going to need it to be at least -8, maybe more like -7. And when I say that, I'm talking about integrated, so that's like measuring the entire track and giving you an average value for the whole track. You want it to be at least -8. -7 would be better. -6 would be like competing with professional masters. And -5 would be making people's ears bleed. So now we're hitting to -20, so we've got a long way to go, right? Now, if you're just using Ableton, you can use the stock limiter. I'm not really sure what to do now, because if I start using this limiter now, it's gonna like really turn up the stream. I suppose I should just do it. So this is a warning to everybody who's watching this now. I'm gonna gradually raise up the volume of the music, and you might want to have your finger on the volume control of your telly or your computer or whatever you're using, because I'm going to raise it up by quite a bit, okay? So we're going to start at the drop, we're going to start quiet, and we're going to do this gradually, and perhaps you guys should gradually turn down this stream just to so you don't end up waking the neighbours and everything. Alright, so I've got a limiter here, I'm going to turn it on. Now it's doing nothing to start with because the gain is on 0. What we want to do is gradually turn this up while also looking at our Ulean loudness meter 2. Now here on the limiter there's this gain reduction meter, so when you start to see level on there, you'll know that you're kind of hitting 0 dB and you're actually limiting it, alright? Now is when you're probably going to want to turn down your output on your computer or your telly, because I'm getting louder and louder. Getting louder and louder. Make sure you're using your volume control now. I don't want to wake up the baby. Right, I'm still getting louder. So you can see the short term on the LUFS meter. Now it's like -9, so we're kind of almost there. Now we're at -8. So you get the idea, you know. I'm not really trying to deafen anyone, but and to everyone who turned it down a bit, now you're going to hear me really quiet. So this is the thing, you know, this is why I had a bit of a dilemma there, whether to show you this. But the idea is basically you crank up the gain on the limiter. You might want to use ozone instead. And the idea is to limit it, take off a few dB in terms of gain reduction, don't really go anywhere past like 6 or 7 dB of gain reduction, and you want to get your LUFS to roughly -8 or -7. All right. People like to use clippers, and people like to do a little bit of gentle compression on the master as well. One thing I will say is that if you're going to use compression, a glue compressor on your master, I would recommend doing it with the ratio of 2:1 rather than 4:1. Okay, and when it comes to the threshold and moving that down and moving this little needle, I would recommend doing it so that it's only giving you like half a dB to 1 dB of gain reduction and no more. All right, so when it comes to mastering, what you want to do, what I would recommend you guys do is like export your tune at this stage with the limiter on it so that you're hitting the target LUFS, and go and have a listen to it in your car. Go and have a listen to it on your Bluetooth speaker, listen to it on your earbuds, and listen to it everywhere, and compare it to other people's tunes, and just see what you think needs doing to it. You might see that the sub bass is too loud or too quiet. You might decide that your highs and your hi-hats and stuff are a bit too spiky or a bit too bright. You might want to adjust that, you know. And there's also, I'm not going to cover it today because this is kind of a beginner's tutorial, but there's also this thing where you use a reference track and you keep going back and forth between your track and the reference track, and just listening out for how loud their hi-hats are, how loud their sub bass is, and then listening to your track and trying to match it. So that's another thing you can do, but you can also do that while you're out and about with your phone and your headphones. So let's say if you're sitting on the bus, you can play my man's tune and then play your tune, and then you just see like, is mine as loud, is mine as punchy, does mine have way too much sub bass? Because one thing I will say is that, you know, when you're pushing it into this limiter and you're seeing that gain reduction meter, if you've got way too much sub bass in your track, then you're going to find it harder to limit it and to get it to the right level. If you've got your sub bass just right, and you've done, this is, someone was asking me before, why remove all the dynamics? This is why, because when it comes to pushing it into the limiter, if you've left all the dynamics without doing anything to it, you will make the limiter work really hard, and it's probably going to end up sounding distorted and farty before you can even hit your target LUFS. So that's why, if you've controlled your dynamics well, if you've done some sidechain compression on your bass so that the kick is ducking it, and if you've got your mix sounding very balanced, then theoretically all you should really have to do is push up that gain on the limiter until you hit your target LUFS, which is -8 or -7, and then you're done. If you decide that when you're out and about and you hear that maybe certain frequencies are too loud or too quiet, well, then you can either address it with some subtle EQing. For example, you bring in an EQ8, or if you're using some sort of paid plugins, you might want to use that. And again, you know, I was saying with the glue compressor, you want to be very gentle and just do half a dB. It's the same with doing your EQing at this stage. In the mastering stage, all you want to do is just boost by, for example, like 1 dB. So you might want to add something like this. So it's like a high shelf, adding roughly a dB to your entire top end, you know? And then you might say, oh, there's too much sub bass. So what I'm going to do is at somewhere like 80 hertz and below, I'm just going to put a low shelf and take out 1 dB like that. So you might end up with a curve looking like that, you know? Very gentle and very subtle moves when it comes to mastering, you know? When you're doing earlier on in the mix, you can do much more over the top EQing and just cutting things out and boosting things. But when it comes to doing the master, everything should be very small maneuvers. And when you're doing your glue compressor, make the needle hardly move, you know? And just let the limiter do most of the work when it comes to your gain reduction and boosting it up. the last thing I'll say is, why am I what? Just for the people who don't understand, when I say gain reduction, but I'm actually making it louder, that might be a little bit confusing. What it is it's reducing the peaks. So that means that overall you're pushing the level of the whole thing louder, you know? And it's all about listening out for distortion. So I'm going to play it again now, and it's going to be loud, all right? So this is your warning. It's going to be loud. If you are playing this, it's kind of getting late, you know, so you don't want to wake the neighbours. So that's your warning. It's going to be loud, but let's play it one more time and look at the Ulean loudness meter, and we're trying to get it to -8 or -7 on here, and we're listening out to make sure it doesn't fart or it's got no distortion, especially in the low end. All right, here I go. So that was it. That's a quick guide on how to mix and master. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. I hope you've learned something. You know, this isn't a set in stone rules. You can break these rules. You can do it in a totally different way, but this is just how I do it. And as you can see, I was able to hit -8 pretty comfortably on the LUFS meter without it sounding farty or distorted. I probably could have pushed it up to -7. If I want to. If you're finding it's difficult to get up to -7 and it's kind of distorting and stuff, you probably just need to go back to your mix and adjust a few things, maybe do a little bit more control on the dynamics and try again and try and push it up to -7. If you get to -7 and you've got no farty low end and everything's sounding great, just export it and then get on your decks, have a mix and mix it in with some other people's tracks and see how it's sounding compared to their tracks, you know? So, thank you so much for joining me. I've really enjoyed this stream. And I think the next one's going to be on Sunday night, and we'll just carry on with the Liquid tune that we made in the beginner's guide last week. So with that being said, have an amazing evening, and I'll see you next time.